Where is he?
Good evening and welcome to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum. I'm Maggie Williams. I'm the director of the Institute of Politics. As you know, at the forum, we try and discuss issues that occupy the present, shape our future, and nothing looms larger now than the future of our country's security in this age of the internet, advanced technologies, and cyber warfare. Our conversation tonight is with two leading experts on U.S. defense operations and policy, what they are, where they're headed, and what they need to succeed. Our moderator is Michael Sulmeyer, Director of the Cybersecurity Project at the Kennedy School's Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs, and we thank the Belfer Center for co-sponsoring this event with the Institute of Politics. Michael also is contributing editor to Lawfare, and I recommend to you the Lawfare blog's assessment of the CIA and WikiLeaks. Before coming to the Kennedy School, Michael served as Director of Plans and Operation for Cybersecurity in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, where he worked on efforts to counter hostile cyber activities. He also worked at DoD on arms control policy and maintaining strategic stability among the US, China, and Russia. Pretty big job. Michael was a Marshall Scholar at Oxford, where he earned his doctorate in politics, and he received his MA in War Studies from King's College London. He also holds a BA and JD degrees from Stanford. We are grateful that Michael is with us tonight and anxious to have him to begin our discussion. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Michael Sulmeyer. Michael.
Thank you very much. Welcome back to the forum. We've got a great show for you tonight. I am Michael Sulmeyer, but the real star of the show is Steve Walker here from DARPA, which is a terrific opportunity for us to learn about the front lines of research and technology in our defense establishment. The introduction you heard about me is going to be tragically longer than I'm going to give for him, since you can very easily find that. We'll get right to the good stuff, but what's there to know? He's been an employee of the U.S. Air Force in different capacities for a long time. He has been with DARPA for a long time and is now currently the acting director after having been the deputy director for several years. He is trained as an aerospace engineer as well. So with that, let's get right to it. Steve, tell us a little bit about what DARPA does, what its mission is, and if there is one program or one project that you've seen that's really astounding, that you would say, come work for DARPA. Everybody at Harvard, come work for DARPA. And this is what I want to get you with. Tell us what that one lead program would be in your mind.
Well, I'll start with the program. How about the internet?
Okay. Heard of it.
All right. No, DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. That's what DARPA stands for. It actually started as ARPA back in 1958 after the Russians put up the Sputnik satellite. Dwight Eisenhower said, hey, we were surprised. I don't want to be surprised again. And so he started this organization called ARPA at the time, DARPA now. Our mission, essentially, is to develop breakthrough technologies for national security. That's what we're about. We have a budget of about $3 billion a year. That's about 25% of the DoD science and technology budget. And we're really the part of that S&T ecosystem that spends our time thinking about projects and programs that make sense for 20, 30, 40 years down the road. We are the agency that has been set up within the Department of Defense to think disruptive, to think innovatively, to think about, what is that project that we can pursue that's going to change the world. That's sort of the bar we use. We look at impact. Is this going to change the world, or is this incremental? If it's incremental, it's not really something for DARPA to take on. And so that's sort of the bar. We try and have that kind of impact. I mentioned jokingly the internet, the late 60s, the idea that we should really think about connecting computers. Computers were very nascent at the time. Licklider at DARPA, program manager and later an office director, had this idea of connecting computers and having them talk to each other. And so the first link, computer to computer, actually happened about 1969, I think, between UCLA and SRI. And that led to what later became known as the ARPANET, a defense network of computers, which was the precursor to the internet. And so we actually have a program manager now at DARPA who says if you're at DARPA and you don't invent the internet, you get a B. It's kind of a funny thing he likes to say, but it sort of describes in a very short and succinct way what we strive to achieve every day, and that is breakthrough technologies, disruptive, innovative technologies that can lead to real capabilities for our warfighters and give them an advantage.
Terrific. You have me, and as soon as I get fired from Harvard, I'll come work for
Okay,
government.
good.
Thanks to that. Let me ask, so you've got to see so many nascent ideas and proposals come your way and coming to DARPA, being pitched to DARPA. How do you think about weighing the opportunities to have that more than incremental change when you're looking at 30, 40, 50 different proposals that none of them seem feasible today? How do you think about the criteria and the process that goes into what kind of research you're going to fund
Sure.
and support?
Well, it's up to our program managers, right? They bring the ideas to the leadership. We spend a lot of time trying to going and finding the best and brightest people we can find out there from government, from industry, from universities. These are usually people that have done something, really interesting and very profound in their career already. But they're also people that have an idea or a drive to get something done that they can't necessarily get done somewhere else. So we bring them to DARPA. We bring them in. As soon as we bring them in, we pretty much immediately send them out to go interact with their research communities and develop new ideas that they can bring to the leadership. They'll bring an idea, and many times these ideas are from the performer community, universities, companies, other government agencies, and they'll come up to what we call our technology council, which is our council of leadership, all the tech office leaders and the DARPA director and the deputy director, and they will make their case for why this is a good idea. And we had a former director at DARPA called George Sulmeyer in the late 70s. Part of the title was Invisible Airplanes. Well, he and DARPA at the time worked with the Air Force to develop the first stealth airplane, which eventually led to the F-117 for the Air Force. But George Sulmeyer had this set of criteria called the Sulmeyer Catechism, it's become known, that he used to judge whether a program was worthy to take forward. And we still use that Sulmeyer Catechism today at DARPA. When a program manager comes and briefs us their idea, and it's a very simple catechism. It basically starts with, what are you trying to do? Tell us without any jargon. What is the program objective? How is it done today? And what is your technical approach that's going to be part of your program? How is that different than how it's done today? Who cares? If you're successful, who, mostly in the military, is going to care and want to take this forward into a real capability? And how much is it going to cost? And then how are you going to measure your progress along the way, and how long is that going to take? What are the metrics that you're going to measure your progress by? But it's the who cares piece, and it's the, if you're successful, what impact, how is this going to change the world, that we really take a hard look at and make sure that that criterion is met.
So to follow up on the who cares, which is a question so often I think I often forget about. The question of needing to make sure there is a military application and a Defense Department prospective client, at least. I think during the Iraq war years and those worst years, the narrative is that DARPA did move to accelerate those technologies that had more direct and clear applications for those warfighters. And that as the war in Iraq wound down, DARPA shifted back its research efforts to more basic research efforts. What do you see going forward as that mix between needing to bring technology forward to the warfighter quickly, but also make sure that DARPA is supporting more basic, seemingly infeasible research today?
Well, it's always a balance. When we do one or the other, we're not doing our job. And so we try and maintain a balance. We're invested in basic research that is very, you can't quite tell what the application's going to be actually in some of these cases, but we know it's an important technology area, and we know the technology is moving fast, and we don't want to be surprised. As I said, part of our charter is preventing technological surprise, and so part of what DARPA does is invest in technology that we can tell has a play in national security. We're not quite sure what all the applications are. It's moving fast. We don't want to be surprised. I would offer that biology is one of those areas today. But we can never forget who we're fighting for, as the saying goes, and the warfighter is our customer. It's about national security. It's about protecting the nation. And so we have to have programs, and we ensure that we have programs that are transitioning to real warfighter needs. Oftentimes, but I will say, we don't really respond to big R requirements from the Pentagon. We are not the place that looks at all the warfighter requirements and tries to say, okay, we need to meet that one. If we're doing that, we're not looking far enough ahead. And so we do talk to leadership about their needs. We have regular meetings with the vice chiefs of all the services. We try and figure out what their needs are, what they can't quite get their head around, but they know they need a capability in this area. That informs us enough to go generate some program ideas and to try and work that space. And so it's a balance. We try and make sure we're at the bleeding edge of technology to not be surprised, but then also very close to our warfighters and focusing on problems and needs that they have today.
Terrific. Okay, so let me ask you about AI. All the cool kids are talking about artificial intelligence. Let me read a quote from Mustafa Suleyman, who's the head of DeepMind. Everyone know DeepMind, Google's effort in London on artificial intelligence. Here's the first thing that he says. He says, the potential benefits are huge, 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 since everything that civilization has to offer is a product of human intelligence. We can't predict what we might achieve when this intelligence is magnified by the tools AI may provide, but the eradication of disease and poverty are not unfathomable. Because of the great potential of AI, it is important to research how to reap its benefits. So you're looking out 15 years, 10, 15, 20, however long. Are you seeing that from a defense perspective? Are you seeing those potential benefits for the defense enterprise?
Oh, we very much are. We have several projects in artificial intelligence, but when we think about AI, let me back up before I talk about a project or two. We think about AI in sort of three waves. The first wave is what we call first wave AI, and when we think about first wave, we think of TurboTax as a great example. You have a set of rules. It's very rules based. If this happens, then you do this. We have machines that are programmed to help us in that way. That's really a first wave type of AI. A second wave, second generation type of AI is what you hear a lot about today, which is machine learning, deep learning, the AI systems that are actually winning at AlphaGo, et cetera. Those are statistical based AI programs. They use statistics and neural nets and other methods to, within a certain bounds, spit out an answer with the probability that it's 80% correct, 90% correct, whatever. We are making use of that technology today and applying it to warfighting systems and using it to effectively, in real time, respond to the enemy, say in the EM spectrum domain. The third wave of AI is really where we're doing a lot of our research right now, which is, having a machine learn in a certain context and being able to have a human communicate with a machine more effectively than we do today, and vice versa. And that will be really the area or the wave that we see that enables AI assisting humans in the warfighting domain in a very powerful way. There's pieces to that we're working today. We have a program called Explainable AI, which I think is going to be a very important program. It's actually being run by a program manager who's at DARPA for a third time, I believe. He's the same program manager that ran a program called PAL that led to Siri. But he's working this program called Explainable AI, which is research looking at how do we not just get the answer out of an AI machine with a probability, but along the way of that machine calculating that answer, how do we understand how the machine is calculating that answer? AI typically today is pretty much of a black box. He wants to open that black box up and understand how the machine is making that decision and spitting out that answer versus just an answer in probability. I think that will be key to actually trusting machines more to come up with an answer. You mentioned fighting disease. We have a program called Big Mechanism, which is using the ability to use AI to read hundreds of thousands of research papers in curing cancer is the example problem we picked. And having AI do that reading and then piecing the data together to, the objective is find a cure of cancer. Don't know if we'll do that, but demonstrating the ability of AI to do something a human could not do on their own, and help a human solve a really critical problem for the country.
Now, if you can get the machine to grade those papers automatically, you'd be very popular.
Help a lot of profs out
here at Harvard. I think very, very popular. Let me now read the second quote from Sulmeyer, and I would note these are from 2 letters that he and others in his field have written, public letters, which you can find on the web, addressed to leaders about concerns that they have with AI. And let me do this one here about the risks. The key question, he and his colleagues say, for humanity today is whether to start a global artificial intelligence arms race or to prevent it from starting. If any major military power pushes ahead with artificial intelligence weapons development, a global arms race is virtually inevitable. And the end point of this trajectory is obvious. Autonomous weapons will become the Kalashnikovs of tomorrow. We therefore believe that a military artificial intelligence arms race would not be beneficial for humanity. There are many ways in which AI can make battlefields safer for humans, especially civilians, without creating new tools for killing people. So a slightly different take on artificial intelligence, some of the risks that you and your DARPA colleagues see as you are developing and working in this space.
Sure. I would say first that we're very clear in DoD about having lethality or weapons under human control. So in the end, and I've never talked to a sailor, airman, soldier, Marine that doesn't agree with that the lethality decision in the end should always be made by a human. And so I completely agree with that. And as we're developing AI technologies, I think we have to be mindful that we want to develop them to help the human warfighter make his decisions more quickly and more effectively, but we never want to put the machine in charge. Okay,
understood. Let's go to another topic that all the cool kids talk about on their first dates, which is cybersecurity. DARPA sponsored a grand challenge on cybersecurity last year. Can you tell us a little bit about why it was so grand? What was the challenge? Who won? And why?
Sure. DARPA has about 260 programs right now, projects, and occasionally we will put a challenge out to the world. We don't do this for everything, But some of you may remember back in the early 2000s, we put out a self-driving car challenge, actually. And the challenge was to drive across the desert. I think that first challenge, no car made it very far. We ended up doing 3 self-driving car challenges. The third one ended up in a sort of an urban setting where cars, by the third challenge, they actually stopped at stoplights and ran around a racetrack by themselves. So that led to a whole, new industry, essentially. The top 3 performers in that challenge went on to get hired by the Googles of the world, and we see history being made right now in that area. So DARPA decided in cybersecurity being a very difficult and challenging area, what could we do? And so program manager came up with an idea a program manager who had experience with DEF CON and Black Hat conferences and the hacking community came up with an idea. DEF CON every year is a hacker and cybersecurity conference. They have a competition called Capture the Flag, where the best human hackers compete with one another to see if they can capture the flag. They create vulnerabilities, they hack each other, vice versa, and until a winner arises. And what his thought was could we have machines do this? Could we have a machine compete with another machine, and then could we have the best machine compete with the human hackers? And what he was trying to do was demonstrate the power of artificial intelligence again. In this case, it was mostly first wave AI to look at a code, find a bunch of vulnerabilities, correct those vulnerabilities, and then make use of the other machine's vulnerabilities and try and hack them. And so we had 7 finalists in this competition out in DEF CON last August, 7 teams. The winning team was Carnegie Mellon University, their team. And they were able to, basically identify these vulnerabilities in the other machines, take advantage of them, and almost at the same time find their own and repair them. This happened in a matter of 20 to 30 minutes. So it brought home to us, again, the power of applying artificial intelligence to a problem that we have for national security and doing something that a human just couldn't do in that kind of time frame. And the Carnegie Mellon team went on to compete in the human competition the following day and ended up either last or second to last. I think they ended up last. But about halfway through the competition, they were sort of in the middle of the pack. So they held their own until the very end, and then I think they lost. But it was an interesting experiment in that I think we've proven that cybersecurity in the future and defending networks in the future, just throwing more people at the problem is not going to solve that problem. We're going to have to get smarter, and we're going to have to use machines to help us real time in protecting our networks, I believe. The other thing is, could we use these machines ahead of time as we're writing software for our military platforms? Could we use these artificial intelligence techniques to find our own vulnerabilities before we actually put it out there on the network or in platforms? And so we're thinking through all of that. I don't know that we'll do another challenge. Many of the commercial companies and many of the defense infrastructure has taken notice, and they're proceeding down their own paths with new capabilities in this area.
Got it. All right. Well, I have another couple questions, but as we get on to that point in the conversation where you ask questions, for you longtime listeners but first-time callers, the deal here is you go stand by the microphone, and I call on you. So it's not particularly complicated, but in about a minute or two, if you have a question, why don't you go start lining up? We've got 2 down here and 2 slightly up above for those folks sitting in the comfortable seats. But while I still have you for another couple minutes, let me ask about wounded warriors and privacy. So let me ask first about privacy. There's a lot of concerns right now. There have been a lot of concerns about the government's role in privacy for a long time, but especially after the unauthorized disclosures by Edward Snowden, you see this really come to the fore. DARPA has a program called Brandeis about privacy. Could you talk to us a little bit about what DARPA is doing in this space?
Sure. Brandeis was started about the same time as Snowden, I think. There was a lot of talk at the time about you could only have one thing. You could only have security or you could only have privacy. It was like this slider bar that you could only have one or the other. And Brandeis was started. Brandeis is named after a famous, I believe it was a Supreme Court justice that wrote the opinion on privacy way back. But it was started with the premise that maybe you can have both. And so it's a research program looking at how people can have individual privacy, but voluntarily allow law enforcement or the government to use their data in case of an emergency, say the Boston bombing, or something happens and there's an emergency. People can choose to allow law enforcement to use their data in that kind of circumstance. That's one of the research efforts looking at that. Another is to keep people's data private or anonymous, but allow the healthcare industry, others to use the data to analyze to make things better. So your data stays. They don't know who you are, but it's used to make the collective better. And so these are research efforts trying to see if we can have both, and we'll see what comes out of the program. But it's still early.
Okay. And then the final question. I'm glad we've got some friends already lining up by the microphones. That's excellent. I'd encourage others, especially those from the cybersecurity program, or if I know your name, that gives me license to call on you. So definitely go line up. The final question, the work that's been done to help wounded warriors seems amazing in terms of some of the work we were talking about a little earlier with neurotechnology. And could you talk to us as we close out on a little bit on DARPA's work on that line?
Yeah, as I mentioned, we started the Biological Technologies Office about 3 years ago because we saw the pace occurring in the biotech area. DARPA's always had a strong effort in fighting infectious disease. So our soldiers go overseas quite a bit, and we want to protect them from viruses and things that they could contract over there. It also obviously has a lot of commercial and application to the private sector. We have a second area that we're working in BTO is synthetic biology, so trying to keep track of what's happening in there, but not only keep track of it, but actually enable more of an engineering design, build, and test cycle to be brought to biology and to be able to design molecules, test them quickly, and do that loop over and over. So we have a program called 1,000 Molecules. Folks in Boston are involved in that. The Broad Institute and others, to develop as many of these molecules as we can to look at new materials, new fuels, et cetera, for DoD. The third area is really neurotechnology, and this is an area, as you said, Michael, that we started back in the decade of the 2000s looking at. We had a lot of warriors coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan without arms, and the state of the art at the time was still the hook. And so what can we do to give these guys and gals this capability back? And so we developed 2 arms. One was, and now this first one has been FDA approved, which is a multi-degree of freedom arm that is controlled by different motors that you can use your foot to control. And this arm will move in all the degrees of freedom that your normal arm would. provides them a lot more capability. But that's not the neurotech part. The second arm we developed was a robotic arm that could actually be tied into the motor cortex of the brain. And we've demonstrated with this robotic arm that a person can think about moving their arm, and this robotic arm will move like a normal arm. We've also gone a step further and demonstrated that we can give that robotic arm and that person a sense of touch. So people have determined that it's important to have this sense of touch to actually pick things up and do things more effectively. And so tying that signal back into the sensory cortex, we've shown that people can actually feel as they touch something with a robotic arm. And this neurotechnology area, and we understand still at this point so little about how the brain works. And some of the things I've mentioned is just sort of getting down the path of how this amazing organ, the brain, works. And as we understand more and more, there are all sorts of positive applications that you can think about in terms of curing disease, psychiatric disease in some cases. So many positive aspects and ways to bring restoration to people that are suffering. But you can also imagine things that we wouldn't necessarily want to do as you open that door further and further. Things that would make humans less human, potentially. And so, especially in this area of neurotechnology, we try and reach out to others. I don't think technologists are not the people that should be making these decisions. So we bring in professors from universities, we bring in ethicists, we bring in people who think about societal implications, and we have panels in this particular area that look at all of our proposals for work that we do in this area, so that we're making sure we're doing things in a measured way and a way that makes sense for the country. And but the opportunities, I think, again, for things like human-machine interface in the future and how we might understand better or communicate better with machines to help our warfighters are enormous. And so we're monitoring this area, again, not to be surprised, but also to understand what future capabilities could look like for our warfighters and for the security of the nation.
Terrific. Okay, now we will start the interactive time. So we'll go down a ground ball down the third base line. Please introduce yourself with name and what you're doing here with us tonight, and then your question.
Hello, I'm Matthew Davis, a recent graduate from MIT in aerospace engineering. Dr. Walker, our distinguished moderator, has mentioned multiple times the word warfighter, and as DARPA is the Defense Advanced Research Projects Administration, I was curious in your unique position as deputy director for multiple years and now acting director. To you, what is war, and what are its components? What is the scope of war, and what role does technology play in your mind in achieving those objectives in the war scheme? How does it interact with those components?
Sure. War can be a lot of different things today. We have peer competitors out there that you might think of that would be a certain type of war. But peer competitors are not the only folks out there that potentially could threaten the nation. We have criminal networks, we have terrorist organizations, we have countries that are using something called hybrid warfare. People refer to it as hybrid warfare, which is not your traditional, bullets flying and sending missiles in the air, but can incorporate capabilities like cyber, electronic warfare, using social media, lots of different activities that can sum up to, in the early stages before kinetic war, affect an outcome. And so we try and be prepared for all of those scenarios. And it's a much more complicated world that we live in today compared to years ago because of that. The latter part of your question?
Out of a fundamental definition, kind of what are the different components of war, and what role do you see technology specifically playing
In some of those.
as part of those components
Okay.
in war? What is that?
Sure. I think you're an aerospace engineer. I'm an aerospace engineer, so the kinetic piece we're more used to. I think the things like cyber. So not only defending ourselves against cyber, but also cyber offense. Social media. I mean, this is an area where we have some activity, but we're looking at, we had one program called MEMX, which we've been working on for several years now, where we developed tools and techniques to search the deep web. The reason we were doing it was and these were public postings from criminal networks, actually, on the deep web. And the application we picked was human trafficking, trying to find people that were advertising other human beings, and developing tools and techniques to find them, and has led to many indictments and some convictions. And so, but you can think about that type of technology is not your standard technology that DARPA would have been working on 25, 30 years ago. And so there are all sorts of new technologies like that we are constantly looking for people to come to DARPA and give us good ideas in to be prepared for all of these other scenarios that are not traditional, I would say.
Excellent. Okay. That was a good question, which ended in a question mark. So let's all emulate that style here. Okay, across the diamond to first base, and then we'll go over to left field.
Hello, Dr. Walker. My name is Greg Allen. I'm a dual degree student here at Harvard Kennedy School and Harvard Business School. And I have the good fortune of doing a project on behalf of one of your colleagues, Director Jason Matheny of DARPA.
Cool.
My question for you is that you mentioned that DARPA's sort of dual mandate is to prevent the United States from being surprised and also to give the United States an enduring technological advantage in warfare. And I'm curious how you see that playing out in a future where the relationship between the public and private sector in technology is different. So for instance, DeepMind, when it was acquired by Google, put in the contract stipulations that they never have a military contract as one of the requirements for being acquired. And then at the same time, just a handful of Silicon Valley companies put together have more research and development spending on artificial intelligence alone than the entire United States federal government has on computer science and mathematics combined. So how is DARPA going to keep us from being surprised in a world where the commercial world is spending far more on advanced technology and in many cases keeping that proprietary and secret?
Thanks. That's a great question. We have to plug into that. And we do in many different ways. I wasn't aware of that stipulation in that contract, but fortunately, many companies and private concerns do want to work with the Department of Defense and do want to work with the federal government. It's just sometimes we make it awfully hard on them. And so one of the things we've tried to do at DARPA is make it much easier to interact with the commercial sector and companies that are just getting started, because I was mentioning to some people earlier that if you want to be on the bleeding edge of technology, you got to work with people at universities, you got to work with people in non-traditional companies, sometimes people that don't have security clearances. You got to work with the best people in the world. And so we attempt to do that. Certainly on our unclassified programs, we're all over the world working with performers. And our microelectronics office just put out a broad agency announcement. This is the mechanism that we use to talk to the world, to tell them what our ideas are. And most of our BAAs over the years are fairly simple, but they've been written for the defense community. And Microelectronics Technology Office, which works a lot with the commercial sector, just put out a 7-page broad agency announcement on the web, written in plain English, that allows us to work with any company without a DoD cost accounting system, et cetera. So if you're in the electronic space, and you want to work with us, go look for that because it's a very simple vehicle to use. So we're making an attempt to plug into the best and brightest wherever they are. I think there are a lot of people that want to work with us and want to help us protect the nation, but they think it's cumbersome and they don't have the time to spend to get on contract, and so we're trying to make it easier in that way. Thanks very much. Sure.
Okay, thanks. Fly ball to left field. Go for it.
Hello, my name is Patrick Ramirez. I'm a freshman at the college. My question really ties into what you were saying at the end. How do you attract and retain all the skill that you have at DARPA, considering that personnel can presumably make a significantly larger salary in the private sector?
That's true. You know, people are attracted to DARPA for, I think, a couple different reasons. One, I mentioned earlier, they have an idea they've been dying to get done and they just can't get it done somewhere else. And if they can come to DARPA, convince the leadership that it's a good idea and it's going to change the world, they can get significant resources to go make it happen. And at DARPA, we believe that authority and responsibility go hand in hand. And so if you sold the program, we're going to hold you accountable to working as hard as you can on that program, but you're going to have all the authority to make the decisions. So they find that freedom, that autonomy, and the resources, I think, attractive. Everyone in the building is focused on the mission, developing breakthrough technologies for national security. So you know, if you come to DARPA, it's all about the mission, and that attracts a lot of people. They're willing to take less money to work in a place that is that dedicated to getting the job done. We do have a special hiring authority. Used to be called 1101 because of the section of the law. I think it's now 1121 that allows us to hire people much faster than the rest of government. So we can make an offer to somebody in a week and bring them in the door. That means a lot to people, actually, when they're trying to consider different job offers. We've had people tell us they had another job offer that was a lot more money, but DARPA actually made the decision and wanted them, right? So that allows us to have that kind of flexibility. We can pay a little bit more money than the typical government salary, but you're not going to get rich working at DARPA. The neat thing, though, is the way we bring program managers in, we bring them in for 3 to 5 year terms. And so the advantage of that is we get new people with new ideas all the time at DARPA. The place is not stale. There's an energy there. The other thing that does is it gives people an urgency to get their job done. They know they have 3 to 5 years to get something done they've always wanted to get done. They work hard. And it's a neat aspect about the place, but you go places after you come to DARPA, I guess is the best way to say it. You know a broad research community, a broad industrial base after you've run your programs at DARPA. People want to hire you, and generally people go on to much bigger and better things. Turns out that the person in charge of research at Microsoft, Facebook, and Google are all former DARPA PMs.
Thank you.
All due respect to the Harvard Human Resources Department, but we should find this 1121 section. My goodness, this sounds wonderful. Okay, here we go.
My name's Kevin Leiby. I'm a first-year student at the Kennedy School. Obviously, DARPA is at the service of national security, and the client is the military. But DARPA is known for creating all this research with social returns for the country and for the world. And I'm wondering, you talked about the catechism at the Technology Council. To what degree do social returns factor into decision-making ex ante, if at all, and if so, how? If there's like two similar projects with similar potential for the military, but one has much greater social potential, will those considerations factor into decision-making?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. I want to hammer home, our mission is about national security, so that's what we put first. But we're all Americans, and we all look at every project we do as how it's going to help national security. But wow, if there's a spinoff that helps us with our electronics industry or helps us do, have better health care. An example, fighting infectious disease. is really a dual-use area, right? I mean, if we're gonna produce technology that will help us fight infectious disease overseas in places we are, or be able to develop a vaccine in 60 days, which is the goal of one of our new programs. Just so you know, the state of the art today is it takes a decade to develop a vaccine in this country. We still don't have one for Ebola. So if the goal of a new program called P3, it's on the website, is to develop a vaccine in 60 days. So that's a DARPA hard challenge. If we're successful at that, that'll have all sorts of benefits, not only for national security, but also this country.
All right. Come on over here.
Hi, I'm Saul Tannenbaum, a local citizen. We've recently had a change in administration, so I'd like to ask first, how's the transition going for you guys? And sort of, secondly, in longer term, how do you see the Trump administration affecting, the longer term research agenda of DARPA? And do you think some of its policies will cause friction in you continuing to attract the best and the brightest from around the world?
I can say the transition's going great. We have our heads down doing what we always do, which is trying to think up good ideas to prevent technological surprise and protect our troops and our warfighters. So we're moving forward. We're not stopping. The neat thing about DARPA, we have people in and out for 3- and 5-year terms. We have different directors. We've got different leadership all the time. The neat thing about DARPA that I've seen in my time there and looked at the history of DARPA is that it has had incredible bipartisan support over the years from the White House, from the Pentagon, from Congress. When we go up and testify on the Hill about the technology efforts we're doing and have underway, we get complete support from both sides of the aisle. So we're a very apolitical organization. I think we'll remain that way, and we're just going to keep charging forward.
Great, all right, good question. Over here.
Hi, my name is Frank Yu, and I'm an alumni of the Kennedy School, but I work for SOS Ventures, which runs a series of accelerators in hardware and biotech. So my question is, in the complex manufacturing process of the world, the supply chain extends in all directions. So when you try to make a proprietary sort of product or for national security in the US, your supply chain extends into things like China. And likewise, with the ZTE case, when they were selling things to Iran and North Korea, there were US components in there. So in this sort of interconnected world of the supply chain, what's sort of the future of defense industries of trying to source these materials?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a very complicated world out there right now in that domain. We've got to make sure that we can, again, get our technology, our integrated circuits. We got to get those things at the leading edge of technology. So we've got to have the best for our systems. Oftentimes that means developing those electronics in commercial fabs and foundries, sometimes in different parts of the world. And so we've got to develop technologies, and we're working on technologies to be able to do that and still have confidence in our integrated circuits and our components that go into our systems. That's about all I can say on that one, but it is a problem as you laid out. We have had a policy in this country, and we still do, of trying to develop U.S. critical national security technology in lines that we have oversight over and control and can ensure is not tampered with. And that will work for a little bit longer in the near term. But in terms of the far term and what this looks like many years down the line, we've got to be able to get these things built everywhere. And so we're working technologies to allow for that.
Thank you.
Great question. All right, our old Air Force friend here, James, go for it.
Hi, sir. James Valpiani. I'm an Air Force test pilot and a student here for the year.
Great.
I'm curious, when you look at the research and technology that we and our adversaries are developing, what keeps you up at night from a military and an ethical perspective?
Great. Great question. I have to go back to biology, which is especially in the area of gene editing and manipulating DNA sequences, et cetera. There are lots of, I see lots of potential good out of those technologies and the ability to do that. Fighting disease and curing illness are two that come to mind. But whether for nefarious purposes or just somebody using these techniques, which are becoming more simple to use, unintentionally doing something that they didn't mean to do, but it's just happening. What keeps me up at night is a man-made, genetic editor used to build a new pathogen that we don't have any resistance to, for instance. So we have a Safe Genes program that we just started, looking at where gene editing and CRISPR-Cas9, which is the latest one that's been out in the news, offer all these potential benefits to curing disease and reducing illness. We have a program called Safe Genes, which we started or will start here in a month or two, which is looking at how could we develop techniques that could reverse a gene drive, could develop countermeasures against a gene drive, or basically take a gene drive out of existence and allow for the baseline to return to normal from what it had been, how it had been infected. So these are 3 different areas of the program. But we think it wise to understand how to reverse this capability if we needed to, again, if it was released intentionally or unintentionally against our nation. So that one keeps me up at night, but there are active programs in place to work it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'm really glad we're not going to end on that.
Yeah.
So let's do 2 optimistic questions, right? Okay. We'll start over here and then we'll go over to right field.
Hi, my name's Philip Paulson. I'm a sophomore at the college. To ask the optimistic version of James's question, you may not be able to answer this, but what technology is DARPA working on now that gets you most excited at night, that you go to bed thinking of, wow, this is really going to change how we fight?
That's good. Well, I've got to mention the one that I'm closest to, which is hypersonics. As an aerospace engineer, I've been working hypersonics technology for some years now. Hypersonics is the ability to fly at 5 times the speed of sound or more. So it's a regime where we haven't flown a lot, and what that will provide our warfighter is the ability to stand off much greater distance from the adversary, from a threat, and have a much more survivable kinetic response. And so it interests me from just the standpoint of my own science background and my own research background. But what excites me is we're getting close, and we're getting to a point where I think in the next couple of years you'll be seeing some systems flying, and it will give us a new capability that we don't have today.
All right, good optimistic, or another one over here.
I apologize, but my question I thought up of isn't really that optimistic.
Okay.
But I'll ask it anyway. My name's Danny Bressler. I'm a research associate at Harvard Business School. And mine's sort of related to the question the Air Force gentleman asked. But when you think of warfare over the last 70 years, obviously there's one big technology that's very, very destructive, with the ability to destroy nations, nuclear weapons. What other technologies, it sounds like biotechnologies that you mentioned before, what other technologies do you think could present that potential into the future? And what do you think about proliferation concerns associated with some of those?
With nuclear, or with the nuclear threat?
No, with other types of technologies that have potential to be that destructive.
Yeah, that's a downer of a question to end this.
Sorry, I couldn't change fast enough.
I just have to go back to the bio answer I gave. I think of all the threats that I see out there, that one concerns me the most. DARPA is working technologies, as I mentioned, safe genes, but also technologies that would allow us to find radiation, chemical, and bio threats early across a city landscape, and so we have efforts in that area. So the thing about technology, and is this a good time to end? Because I wanted to make a statement.
Do you guys have a quick?
Oh, okay.
Can you do something really fast, or are you?
I don't know if you can answer it really fast.
Okay. All right. Well, technology is great, and I've been in government almost 30 years now, working in tech development and demonstration. But technology can be used for good and it can be used for evil. It's a double-edged sword, and we need people in government and in our commercial sector that are focused on developing technology so we're not surprised by an adversary who might want to use it, but that understand the limitations of its use and have a desire to use it for the good of our country and for national security purposes in a very controlled way. And so I'll just leave it at that. I think we try and do that at DARPA every day. So.
All right, let me suggest, if I ask those two guys, can you guys come up afterwards and ask him, and I'll hold them down so you can make sure. Okay, and we'll conclude with your closing comments there, which were great.
My only closing comment I wanted to make was for any of you younger folks in here who are considering a career in service to your country, I would highly advise you to take that opportunity. As I said, I've been in government almost 30 years. It'll be 30 years in July. And I came into this role with the Air Force at Air Force Research Lab in an effort to make a difference back in 1987, at the end of the Cold War, I guess, to try and make a difference for my country. And the one thing you will always benefit from a career in the civil service is a sense of mission. The mission is really going to be close to your heart. It's worth working for the American public for national security in my mind, but in other aspects as well. And I just really encourage you to consider that as a future option. And if any of you are really talented in a technical field and want to make a difference, I just would love to have you consider DARPA at some point in your career, because I think you could make a huge difference there. So that's all I want to say.
If I spent time on Twitter, I would retweet that. So please join me in thanking Steve Walker for joining us here this evening. Thank you.